Courtroom observers described an extraordinary moment when proceedings involving Prince Harry were briefly halted, not for legal complexity, but because the judge felt compelled to intervene and correct the witness's behavior. It was a moment few expected to witness, a senior member of the royal family being publicly instructed on how to answer basic questions under oath. Those present noted that the judge's patience was visibly strained. Prince Harry, instead of responding directly to the legal questions presented, repeatedly veered into emotional commentary, personal history, and grievances unrelated to the case itself. The court was not there to hear reflections on personal trauma or family history. It was there to establish facts. This distinction appeared to be lost on the witness. Harry had taken the stand in relation to a privacy lawsuit involving alleged press misconduct. The task before him was straightforward: respond to specific questions about specific articles, dates, and incidents. Yet again and again, his answers drifted far from the matter at hand. He spoke broadly about perceived mistreatment, long-standing resentment toward the media, and personal suffering, often without tying those sentiments to the legal claims under examination. At one point, the judge stepped in, reminding him that testimony is not a platform for personal expression. A courtroom, the judge emphasized, requires concise, relevant answers. Emotional context may exist, but it cannot replace evidence. Legal analysts observing the case described Harry's approach as unusually combative for a witness. Rather than assisting the court in clarifying events, he appeared to challenge the premise of questions, reinterpret timelines, or redirect focus toward broader narratives of injustice. One legal commentator remarked that Harry seemed more comfortable debating than testifying. The contrast was striking. This was a man seeking legal protection from intrusive media practices, yet he struggled to adhere to the most basic structure of legal proceedings. His testimony often lacked dates, confirmation, or verifiable detail. Instead, it leaned heavily on personal interpretation. Observers also noted a recurring issue. Harry repeatedly referenced experiences involving his wife and his mother, even when the incidents under scrutiny occurred years before those relationships existed. This inconsistency did not go unnoticed. In a court of law, timelines matter. The judge's frustration reportedly deepened as answers drifted further from chronological relevance. From the defense's perspective, the situation was advantageous. Each deviation weakened the clarity of Harry's claims. A witness who cannot stay focused on the facts risks undermining their own credibility, and credibility is central to any civil case. Royal commentators later noted that this courtroom behavior mirrored a broader pattern that has emerged in Harry's public life. He often frames complex situations through a deeply personal lens, where emotional truth takes precedence over verifiable detail. While this approach may resonate in interviews or memoirs, it is ill-suited to legal scrutiny. One former palace insider commented that Harry appears unable to separate his internal narrative from external reality. Every challenge becomes part of a single, ongoing story of mistreatment. In that framework, nuance is lost. But the courtroom moment was only the beginning. Within days of his testimony, Harry's actions outside the courtroom created a stark contrast that fueled criticism. After portraying himself as a figure seeking refuge from relentless media attention, he appeared at a high-profile cultural event, surrounded by cameras, photographers, and celebrities. The shift was jarring. Commentators questioned how someone could argue for heightened privacy protections one day and then willingly participate in public spectacles the next. The inconsistency was difficult to reconcile. Sources familiar with media dynamics noted that public figures often distinguish between unwanted attention and curated appearances. However, the proximity of these events made that distinction harder to defend. Critics argue that Harry appeared to object only to coverage he could not control. This perception has become increasingly common. Over time, Harry's stance toward media exposure has been viewed by some as selective rather than principled. When coverage aligns with his preferred image, engagement follows. When it does not, litigation ensues. This pattern, analysts suggest, has contributed to declining public sympathy. Once regarded as a figure breaking away from tradition in search of independence, Harry is now frequently portrayed as contradictory, seeking both visibility and insulation, attention and immunity. The courtroom episode reinforced that narrative. A legal setting requires discipline and precision. Harry provided neither. Instead, he offered emotion where evidence was required and opinion where clarity was essential. For many observers, the moment symbolized a broader unraveling, one not defined by a single lawsuit, but by an ongoing inability to adapt to environments that do not operate on personal terms.
The implications of Prince Harry's courtroom performance extend far beyond a single case.
Legal experts emphasize that testimony is not judged solely on sincerity, but on consistency. And consistency is where Harry's narrative encountered serious trouble. During testimony, Harry asserted that information about his private life could not have come from friends or family, suggesting that any published material must have been obtained through improper means. This claim was intended to strengthen the foundation of his lawsuit. However, critics quickly pointed out a contradiction. In previous public projects, Harry himself had suggested that members of his own family had contributed to unfavorable media coverage about him. These statements were not obscure. They were broadcast globally in interviews and documentary content. This raised a fundamental question: which version was true? In court, Harry maintained that family leaks were implausible. Outside court, he had implied the opposite. Defense attorneys reportedly seized on this discrepancy, highlighting the difficulty of reconciling these competing accounts. Observers noted that changing narratives depending on context severely damages credibility. A witness cannot reasonably expect one version of events to be accepted under oath, while another circulates freely in public discourse. The inconsistencies did not end there. Harry also advanced the argument that media coverage had actively influenced his personal behavior, including substance use. According to his testimony, press intrusion played a role in pushing him towards harmful choices. Yet this claim stood in stark contrast to his own published work, where he openly discussed those same behaviors in positive or reflective terms. In those accounts, the choices were framed as personal exploration rather than external coercion. Legal analysts describe this contradiction as particularly damaging. Courts are wary of explanations that shift responsibility without substantiation. When a claimant has already monetized personal experiences, reframing them as externally imposed becomes problematic. Photos and reports from public events further complicated the picture. Harry has been seen participating in social settings that appear inconsistent with a narrative of reluctant involvement. While such behavior is not inherently problematic, it undermines claims of victimhood when presented without context. Critics argue that this reflects a broader refusal to accept personal accountability. In their view, Harry seeks both autonomy and absolution, freedom to act without restraint, coupled with insulation from consequence. Meanwhile, reports from those close to the couple painted a less glamorous picture of daily life. Sources described Harry as increasingly withdrawn, spending much of his time at home with limited social engagement. His once expansive circle has reportedly narrowed significantly. Several observers noted that most remaining social connections appear to originate through his wife, rather than independent relationships. Long-standing friendships from earlier stages of his life have largely faded. This isolation, commentators suggest, may contribute to the rigidity seen in public appearances. Without a diverse support network, personal narratives can harden unchecked. Local reactions have also shifted. Residents in the couple's community have expressed skepticism regarding their intentions and authenticity. Such sentiments, once rare, have become increasingly vocal. Adding to the complexity are rumors surrounding Harry's future in the United States. Legal scrutiny of his immigration status has intensified, particularly in light of public admissions regarding past behavior. While no official action has been taken, speculation persists. Some commentators have floated the idea that Harry's increasingly confrontational public stance may reflect deeper dissatisfaction. Rather than stabilizing his situation, his actions often appear to escalate tension. This has fueled theories, unconfirmed but widely discussed, that he may be subconsciously or deliberately creating circumstances that force change. Whether this reflects strategy or desperation remains unclear. Attempts at reconciliation with his family have reportedly stalled. Public gestures have gone unanswered, reinforcing the impression that bridges once burned are not easily rebuilt. Professional endeavors have also faced challenges. Projects announced with significant anticipation have struggled to materialize or maintain momentum. Speaking engagements now appear to rely more on name recognition than subject matter expertise. Critics argue that this shift marks a transition from purposeful advocacy to symbolic presence. When appearances are driven primarily by status rather than contribution, credibility erodes. At the heart of this situation lies a paradox. Harry positions himself as a champion of privacy while repeatedly revealing intimate details about his own life and others. He criticizes intrusion while participating in platforms that depend on disclosure. This contradiction defines much of the public response. Observers are less focused on whether Harry is right or wrong, and more concerned with whether his position is coherent. The courtroom exposed these tensions in their most unforgiving form. Unlike interviews or documentaries, a legal proceeding does not accommodate narrative flexibility. Facts must align, stories must hold. What remains is a portrait of a man caught between identities, royal and civilian, advocate and celebrity, victim and participant. Whether this represents a temporary crisis or a lasting transformation is yet to be seen. But one conclusion is difficult to avoid. The legal stage stripped away the protective layers of storytelling, leaving only contradictions in their place.